Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, maybe, wherever you are in the world, listening to this delivery of PMP Exam Tech Camp. Today is a rather important day because this is where we begin to talk about risk management in more detail. We have mentioned risk a few times, but this is where we get into a little bit more fine detail. So what I would like to do is start off with a little bit of risk theory. And as the instruction evolves, I will then shift gears into some questions and answers and more practical input from you guys. Okay? So I'm going to ask you a few random questions to get this started. So do me a favor, and if you can chat into me in the chat box, that will be cool. But why don't you guys tell me, what is the last process of risk management? There are how many processes to begin with, and what is the last one? What is the last process and how many are there? Oh, no, today is risk. So I made the announcement yesterday, and we always attack the biggies first. Quality is substantial, but risk is worse. So, so I want to get you guys while you're fresh before Friday comes. So there are 7, and the final process is monitor risks. Very good. Okay. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone. All right. Can you chat into me really quick? In which process do we use the tool and technique? Prompt list. Where is the prompt list used? Welanda and Donna say it's identify risks. And so says Jan and Cadian as well. You guys are all correct. It is identify risk. Well done. Can you guys tell me where checklists are used? Checklist. Checklist. Do you know? Same one. Identify risks. Very good. All right. Can you guys tell me where a stakeholder analysis is used in risk management? Where do we use a stakeholder analysis? Do you know? Stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder. Where is the stakeholder analysis? Krishnan got it, and so did Jan. Very good. It's plan risk management. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's dive into talking about what exactly happens here for a little bit, and we'll see how we perform as we go along. Okay. So, risk management, chapter 11. By the time we're done, our goal is to have spoken about the numerous tools and techniques, the numerous inputs and outputs, and we'll talk about the importance of the risk register and the risk report. And hopefully we'll be able to hit EMV, which is a big topic as well. And we'll talk about the difference between qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis. So risk could have different perspectives, depending on what side of the lens you are. Risk interacts with many other knowledge areas. Someone may only see a cost risk, and then someone else may see, no, that's a schedule risk or scope risk. So risk has many different dimensions, and different people perceive risk in various ways. Like in this one, this guy is seeing the positive risk, nuclear power company, the big money. The other guy says it's a risk because he's thinking about the safety concerns or whatever. So in any risk, you see positive and negative. And for that reason, when we really talk about what a risk is the possibility of a negative or positive occurrence. In other words, it's uncertainty that can impact the project. So project risk management deals with uncertainties that can impact the project, be they positive uncertainty or negative uncertainty. Sometimes the positive uncertainty overrules, and other times the negative uncertainty does. So in this image I'm showing you here, what is the negative risk? What is the negative risk in this image I'm showing you? What do you think? Is there a negative risk? Jan says death. The mouse could get killed. Entrapment, getting caught in that trap. Thank you, Donna and Kadian. Any other perspectives? Getting caught in the trap? Okay, good. Let me ask you another question. Now, that risk you've described is from the perspective of who? The risks you guys are describing, that is from the perspective of whom? Jason says he has a helmet. From the perspective of the PM, of the trap? All right, let me give you a better perspective to this. Let's say the two entities involved are the mouse, obviously, and let's say you, the PM, has been called in to prevent this mouse from causing havoc. You are a mouse trap expert, and they just want you to take care of this creature. He's causing havoc. It's going into the cereal, leaving droppings. So you've been called in as the expert. What is the negative risk to you? You set this trap. You're being paid big consultancy fees to take care of this creature. So tell me, what is the negative risk to you? What is the negative? So remember, we need to frame our ideas around the fact that a risk is uncertainty that can impact your project. What is your project? To get rid of the mouse. What is the negative uncertainty to you? Jason says it spawns. Very good. The trap may not work. Good. The mouse gets the cheese and gets away. That's a good one. Not being able to catch him. Now you guys are thinking. Thank you, Greg. Awesome. So you guys get the picture. From the mouse's perspective, the negative risk is all the things you've described. Death, being caught in the trap. But from your perspective as the expert called in to take care of this mouse, your negative risk is different. Same picture, but different perspectives to the scenario at hand. To your competitor, it's you getting the deal. That's the negative risk, you know. To you, the negative risk is not getting the deal. So whenever we look at a picture like this or a risk situation, we need to say, what is the negative uncertainty from the perspectives, the multiple perspectives involved? Okay, like your team members all have different perspectives. To someone who is beholding the coming of SAP, that in and of itself is a risk. But to the business manager who wants to get things done quicker and faster, SAP is positive to him. All right, so what about the positive uncertainty? In the perspective of the mouse, what is the positive uncertainty? Positive to the mouse. What would be a good picture for this mouse? Greg says, getting the cheese. Absolutely. That's positive. That's really the big thing, getting the cheese. What would be even better than getting the cheese? A meal, good. What would be even better than getting the cheese? Is there anything that could top getting the cheese? Because what if the mouse gets the cheese, but the trap goes off and makes noise? Maribel says, full belly and lives. Exactly. So there is an opportunity for the mouse here in not just the cheese, but in deciphering how the trap works. And if the mouse is clever enough and can decipher that, well, like Maribel says, for life, a full belly, like that's just going to be your ATM machine. That's the mouse's ATM. If the mouse can figure out how to keep getting the cheese. Yes, Willanda says getting the cheese and not trapped. Escaping death is very good, Donna. That's exactly what I was thinking as well. Escaping death. So that is ultimate for the mouse. Very good. Okay. So let's take a look at one more thing. What strategy? I think Jason gave this away with his previous remark. But what strategy has the mouse adopted from either positive or negative? You want to follow through with your thoughts on that, Jason? What is the strategy that the mouse has adopted? What strategy do you think this is? What is the mouse doing? Greg says his helmet, wearing a helmet, says Kadian. Very good. Now tell me, in PMI terms, what is that strategy called? So obviously the helmet, what's the helmet going to do? Tell me, what's the helmet really going to do? Or what is the mouse hoping the helmet does? What is the helmet supposed to do? Thank you, Jan. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Ilano. Risk mitigation. So while we're in this vein, can you guys just type into me the other 4 strategies? There are 5. You've mentioned 1 for negative risks. So mitigate is 1, but what are the other 4 for negative risks? Avoid, transfer, accept. Thank you very much. What's the last one? Avoid, transfer, accept. I think we're still missing one. So I can see avoid, transfer, accept, escalate. Thank you very much. That is the one I'm looking for, Greg. Escalate. Escalate. So I'm going to give you guys a quick way of remembering these. There is an acronym for those. So you remember your friend, Mr. T. What was Mr. T's show called? You remember? What was Mr. T's show called back in the day? A-Team, you got it. So what is the A? Accept. What is the T? Transfer. What is the E? Escalate. What is the A? Avoid. And M? Mitigate. If you remember the A-Team, you remember your 5 strategies for negative risks or threats. All right. So let's go for the positive. There are strategies for positive risks. So can you guys chat into me all of the 5 for positive risks? Thank you. Enhance, share, accept. What else? Escalate, very good. And what's the last one? The one that is very aggressive. Yeah, you chatted in share already. What is the most aggressive of them all? In fact, think of it like throwing the whole kit and caboodle. There you go. Thank you, Jan and Krishnan. Awesome. So the little acronym for this is a little bit creative, but it is easy. Easy. So you got E, if you want that to be your exploit. A for accept, S for share, 1 E for escalate, and the other E for enhance. All right. So these 5 strategies on either side are going to be tested on the exam, and you need to be able to distinguish one from another. So let me ask you a few random questions, and you can just type in the strategy. Fail encounters a risk on his project and he feels he's not qualified to handle it. He tells his boss about it. What strategy is that? I'm not qualified to handle this. So he tells his boss. Thank you, Yolanda. That is a good answer. I know what you meant. Escalate. That is the correct answer. Okay. Here's another example. Phil encounters a risk on his project. As a way of dealing with the risk, he sends his team members for training to reduce the possibility of them doing something wrong. What strategy is that? Thank you, Maribel and Cadian and Willanda. Thank you very much. So if Phil says, I'm sending you for training to reduce the possibility of you goofing, that is mitigate. All right. Phil's boss encounters a risk that will affect a particular part of the project. Instead of carrying out that piece of work, they decide to remove it from the project management plan. What strategy is that? They remove part of the scope from the project management plan. Thank you, Yolanda and Cadian and Maribel. That is correct. Avoid. So removing some of the scope is avoidance. Doing something different from what you originally planned, that is avoidance. Okay. Phil encounters a risk as he's going through his risk register, and the risk is becoming a bigger threat. He decides to purchase performance bonds from an external source. Of course, external. What strategy has Phil adopted if he purchases performance bonds? Or think of it as insurance. What strategy is that? Thank you. Oh, that was quick. Transfer, says everyone. Thank you very much, folks. Awesome. Transfer. All right. So we've talked about avoid, transfer, escalate. And one more. Phil encounters a risk on a project. He looks at how big the risk is in terms of dollars and realizes it's a $200 risk. He decides to do nothing to deal with the risk. What strategy is that? Give me a pinpoint precise name, more precise than acceptance or accept. Give me an even more precise name for what Phil is doing. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing nothing. Thank you, Maribel. That is correct. It is passive acceptance. That is exactly what it is. Not doing anything to deal with the risk is passive. Now let's change the story. Phil encounters a risk on his project and he decides to put aside a small contingency reserve to deal with the risk if it happens. What strategy has Phil adopted? Active accept. Very good. All right. So you guys understand the 5 strategies quite well. You just need to keep your eye on the outcome. Keep your eye on the outcome. Let me give you another example that's a dead-end type of question. So a question that says, Phil is a project manager on a project. As he is going through risk identification, he identifies a risk that he believes could have a big consequence on the project. He sends his team member out to collect data. And that's all they tell you. He sends his team member out to collect data. Which of the 5 overarching strategies is it? Or which of the 5 overarching strategies can you say comfortably it is most likely to be? He sends his team member out to collect data. What's that? Active accept? Accept? The safest answer is accept, my friends, because you do not know what Phil is going to do with that. You don't know. You don't know whether he's going to use it. You don't know what he's going to do. In fact, a very tricky examiner would say it's passive accept because you haven't been told anything that would generate action. So if the passive accept answer is there, I would go with that. Because if it doesn't say sending a team member out to gather data to reduce the possibility of occurrence, it's accept. And if we don't know that fail is doing anything with the data, it's as passive as can be. Except it states, fail sends his team member out to gather data to create a plan B. Now tell me, if the team member is gathering data for a plan B, what do you think that would be? Plan B. You're gathering data to use for a plan B. What's that? Plan B. A plan B to be executed if the risk occurs. Let me make it clear. A plan B if the risk occurs. So which of the 5 strategies is it? It is a fallback plan, Donna. That is correct. Which of the 5 strategies would you say it is? So where does fallback plan come under? If the risk happens, then we will do this. So let me give you another clue. You're not using plan B until the risk happens, right? Contingency. It's also known as a contingency plan. So you guys know the terminology. A fallback plan is also known as a contingency plan. But it is not mitigate. Thank you, Yolanda. It is accept. So if you accept a risk, you can have the contingency plan. It's like an active accept. If the risk happens, then we will spring into action. If the risk doesn't happen, we are not doing anything. That is not mitigate. The difference between mitigate and accept, whether passive, active, whatever, mitigate is taking action before the risk occurs. You're doing something to reduce the impact or the probability before the risk happens. All right? This is a very important concept. If all you're doing is saying, oh, if it happens, then we've got money. If it happens, then we've got a plan B. That's just accept. Because you're not reducing, you're not transferring, you're not doing anything. So you need to be very comfortable in identifying when someone is not doing anything before the risk happens. It's accept. Here's $1 million. So what? You're not using it now. You're using it after the fact. Accept. But active accept. Oh, here's a plan B. If the risk happens, then we'll do this. Accept. Active accept. Here's $10. Active accept. Oh, just forget it. If it happens, it happens. We're not putting any money aside. We're not doing anything. Passive accept. So you got to be able to comfortably say, doing nothing before occurrence of a risk is accept. Doing something, like taking action to reduce the probability or impact, is mitigate. A lot of folks get these two mixed up on the exam. You need to be ready for those borderline questions. Oh, Phil identifies a risk could occur. He creates a robust plan to deal with the risk if it happens. It's accept. Because you're not carrying out your plan until the risk occurs. So this is some of the trickery that I want you guys to be aware of on the exam. Okay? Very good. Let me give you a few positive risk questions. Phil identifies a risk that could bring huge profits to the firm. He decides to implement a strategy that eliminates the possibility of that positive risk not happening. He decides to invoke a strategy that, watch this word, eliminates the possibility of the positive risk. Look out for the word not occurring. Okay, so Phil puts in a strategy that eliminates the possibility of the positive risk not occurring. What strategy is that? You guys got it. Very good. It's exploit. You need to look out for the word eliminate. That is your master key for exploit. Now, on the side of the negative, we also use the word eliminate for avoid. So watch this. In terms of avoid, we are going to eliminate the negative risk. You see, there's a difference here between eliminating the uncertainty with the negative risk versus eliminating the uncertainty with the positive risk. You see? So you need to be ready for the word eliminate if you see it. If it's positive, we're talking about exploit. The word eliminate distinguishes enhance from exploit. Enhance will not use the word eliminate. Enhance will use the word you are increasing the probability of a positive risk occurring, or you're increasing the impact of a positive risk, something to that effect. So beware of the terminology. It is really going to help you in the questions. Okay? Exploit is very strong. It's a complete elimination. Okay. All right, let me give you another one. Phil is a project manager on a project. He's working with certain chemicals. He discovers a chemical that could be the answer to a long-standing industry problem. He decides to give some of the positive risk responsibility to a partner. What strategy is that? You got it. You got it. Very good. It's share. Whether you give 100% or 10% or 20%, as long as you're bringing in that third party, you're talking about sharing. Phil discovers that this risk that he's identified on the project could really help the organization, but he feels he's not qualified to deal with the positive risk. He calls his business unit leader to share the risk with him. What strategy has Phil adopted? He calls his business unit leader to share the risk information with him. I cannot handle this. Phil works in the firm. His leader works in the firm, and he tells his leader, look, I found this. Remember, it's a positive risk. I found this positive risk that could really help our organization, but I'm not qualified to deal with it. It is not enhance or transfer or accept. He tells his business unit leader, there you go, now you're talking. Do not forget that escalate is on both sides of the world, okay? What we're doing now is really gonna help you on your exam because a lot of the questions are built around these scenarios with the 5 strategies on either side. All right. So if Phil tells his business unit leader, hey, I found this, I cannot deal with it. It's not transfer because we're talking about a positive risk here. So he's escalating it to his business unit leader to deal with it. All right. Just keep that in mind. Read it carefully. And just remember, if it's positive, then it does not contain the words used for negative. All right, let me give you another example here. Phil finds a positive risk on a project. However, he is so maxed out with his work and deliverables, he is unable to take it on. So he does nothing about it. What strategy is that? Phil encounters this risk and he's so maxed out, his work is so sky high, he can't do anything about it, so he just leaves it. What's that? That is very good. So it is precisely passive acceptance. You guys are in the zone. That's exactly what it is. It's accept in the umbrella, but if you're getting down into the detail, you would call it passive accept. Very good. All right, Phil finds a risk on his project that could really impact the organization. He tells his boss, who gives him $500 to deal with the risk if it happens. If the positive risk happens, here is $500. What do you think that is? If the positive risk happens, here's $500, put a few bodies on it and see it through to the end. Very good. You guys are in the zone. All right. Now, for those who have not opened the PMBOK guide, let us ask one of our friends who has opened it to tell us the exact page that this stuff is on. Can someone chat into us the page? Because I know you guys are always on your game. You're always tracking what your buddy Phil is saying. Page 395. Thank you very much. So let's take a look at page 395. This is definitely one of the most important pages in the guide. So page 395 gives you the overview of these strategies, or I should say these processes. But where it gets into the weeds, who's got the weed page? Where it gets into the five strategies. 444, thank you. That's the weed page. That's where the weed eater needs to be. You need to be eating all this stuff up because it's the weeds. So it says here, let's see, the story starts on page 442. For negative, I would love for you guys to go dig deep, highlight, just go, as we say in the UK, go bonkers on that page. Go crazy, as they would say here. Page 442, 443, you need to get the lingo exactly as it is into your head. So what I've done is I've taken all this stuff and made it into a very small piece of information for you to digest. And then page 444, where I really want to hone in on is the last paragraph for accept. It says, accepting an opportunity acknowledges its existence, but no proactive action is taken. This strategy may be appropriate for low priority opportunities. It's an opportunity, but yeah, it's not that huge in terms of priority. And it says it may be adopted where it's not possible or cost effective. Like in Phil's case, he just couldn't do anything with it. Acceptance can be either passive, active or passive for positive. Says the most active acceptance strategy is to establish a contingency reserve. Do you see why when I said contingency plan or whatever, it falls into accept? Bear that in mind. Including amounts of time. So saying, oh, I'll put aside some time to deal with it, or I'll put aside some money or resources. It is all accept. Do not be deceived into thinking it's mitigate. You know, it's a cheap trick. It's been a cheap trick for many years to deceive students that putting aside more resources or money if the risk occurs. You see, if the risk occurs, that is really the punchline. It says time, money, or resources to take advantage of the opportunity if it occurs. So the if is what makes it accept. If you took all that time, money, and resources and you implemented some action before the risk, then it would be a different thing. We would be talking about enhance, or on the side of negative, we'll be talking about mitigate. All right, so read that up. That is really going to help you. And then on page 445, this is also a very useful one. Oh, no worries. That page is relevant to the beginning of the whole story. So page 445, it says, some responses are designed for use only if certain events occur, you see. So that word if, again, we're talking about if this happens, then we do this. If our mitigate approach doesn't work, then we will do this. So people sometimes have a chain of actions. If this doesn't work, then we're going to do this. So let's read. It says, for some risks, it is appropriate for the project team to make a response plan that will only be executed under certain predefined conditions if it is believed that there will be sufficient warning to implement the plan. Events that trigger the contingency response, such as missing intermediate milestones or gaining higher priority with a seller, should be defined and tracked. Risk responses identified using this technique are often called contingency plans or fallback plans and include identified triggering events that set the plans in effect. Again, the word trigger or risk trigger is a warning sign that a risk has occurred or is about to occur. Okay, the risk has occurred or is about to occur. That's what a risk trigger is. So be aware of the term trigger or risk trigger. Now going into the next page, page 445, this is outside the realm of the project manager's responsibility. This is where it gets into organizational risks and project risks at a much higher level. So it says risk responses should be planned and implemented not only for individual project risk, but also to address overall project risk. The same risk response strategies that are used to deal with individual project risk can also be applied to overall project risk. So they've listed out everything that is under negative and positive, and this is being used at a much higher or aggregate level. So avoid, exploit, you see they put them together because they're the mirror images of each other. Avoid on the negative, exploit on the positive, transfer on the negative, share on the positive, mitigate on the negative, enhance on the positive, and accept for whatever negative or positive. So it is good to be aware that this stuff right here can be used for either your project, individual project risk, or overall project risk. So again, I would like you to go into those, read the examples they're given. It is really going to help you exam. You can see some of the examples that they have given. It says in avoid, an example of avoidance at the overall project level would include removal of high-risk elements of scope from the project. Where it is not possible to bring the project back within the thresholds, the project may be canceled. So that's most extreme, canceling the project, but that is an avoid strategy at the project, overall project level. Exploit, an example of exploiting the overall project level would include addition of high benefit elements of scope to the project to add value or benefits to stakeholders. Alternatively, the risk thresholds for the project may be modified within the agreement of key stakeholders in order to embrace the opportunity. So I would like you, without reading the PMBOK guide to you, please go through the other examples of transfer or share, examples of mitigate or enhance, and examples of accept. This is going to enrich your exam experience. All right, now with that said, we have a few more things to talk about to give our overall risk understanding a little bit more punch. So I'm going to begin to go into the details of the seven processes here of risk management. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to show you that page, which I am hoping you guys have mastered now. This page called page 25. So let me know if you guys have perfected your act now. Are you guys able to do this now, or are you still not quite there? Can you draw out page 25 or not? Very good. All right. Well, I'm glad to see a few people can. For those of you that are not able to, daily whiteboard. You need a whiteboard. I've got whiteboards all over the place, big, small, medium. You need to have a whiteboard, and that needs to be your obsession daily until you get that page down. Then the next level is for you to begin to identify the outputs like this. You should be able to look up, develop project charter and say, oh, these are the two outputs, project charter and what? The assumption log. Identify stakeholders. Oh, my output is a stakeholder register. Develop project management plan. My output is this. Plan scope management. My output is requirements management. You guys need to get to this level. If you are taking your exam in the next 30 days and you do not know all of the major outputs, I want you to go listen to that audio I gave you again and again and again. You need to get all of the major outputs down, pat. I'm going to give you a quick on the spot test. Can you guys tell me, without looking at your book, of course, name any of the outputs of the process called plan procurement management? Any of the outputs that comes to your head, type them in. I know it's a different knowledge area, but let me give you a quick test and see how many of these you can cough up. Thank you. Procurement management plan. Not that. Not that. Nope. Nope. So the only one that we've got so far is procurement management plan. You see what I'm saying? There is procurement strategy. There's procurement, so bid documents. Yeah. You got to know that stuff, folks. Look, you got to know it. You got to know it even more than your buddy Phil. There are 7 unique outputs. 7 unique outputs from plan procurement management. Thank you. Procurement statement of work. Okay, you've woken up now. Make or buy decisions. Very good. And that's why I'm doing this all over again for those other chapters. But I'm trying to get you to see, folks, knowing page 25 is good, but it is not enough. The next level is knowing all of the major and unique outputs. So I want to challenge you next week. That's going to be your goal, to be able to get this table down and to be able to begin easily just calling out the major outputs from every one of these processes. All right. So let's take a look at what we've got for tonight in risk. So going to risk, you can see it's a 7-headed beast. It is huge, huge. So we've got plan risk management. Someone says, Phil, I've never done risk management in my organization. I've never seen what a plan for managing risk looks like. A plan for managing risk is a very simple document. A risk management plan, very simple document. I'll give you a picture here really quick. So if you take a look here, you can see the risk management plan. This is just a plan for how to manage risks. What processes are you going to put into your project for managing risk? That's really what this is. So the purpose of the document is really to define how risks are going to be managed from start to end. How are we going to do our risk management in general? What is the procedure and approach in general? How are we going to identify risks? How are we going to prioritize and analyze risks? See? And then at a high level, you can begin to knock together what the tools and techniques will look like, how you are going to score the risks, how you're going to prioritize the risks, so on and so forth. But that is very high level, okay? We're doing high level for now. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So that's that at a high level. The next one under plan risk management is identify risks. And this is where the risk register is formed. And there are different variations of risk registers. I'm going to show you a very simple one. Right here, we have the risk ID. So we identify the risk. But then we also need to identify the cause of the risk. What is causing that to happen? So to give you a very quick model, it could be the risk is the risk of falling in the workplace. What caused it? Okay, that was in the way. It happens and happens time and time again on the job site. Someone trips over something. All right, so, no, that's a risk ID, I beg your pardon. Risk here, risk ID is going to be like, just label it, 001. So that would be your risk ID, that would be the cause, that would be the risk. The effect of the risk could be broken bones and other things. Okay, so you could have multiple effects from one risk. You could also have multiple causes of a risk. And what your main goal is in finding the cause is to eliminate the root cause. If you eliminate the root cause, then you are invariably taking care of the risk. The next thing that we have here is going into the qualitative risk analysis. So when you are doing your cause, risk, and effect, I'll just make it yellow. This is really your identify risks right here. Identifying this in the PMI's model of cause, risk, and effect, this is identify. All of this is identify risks. Okay? So when you think of identify risks, you got to think of cause, risk, and effect. Okay? Cause, risk, effect is identify. It's nothing else. Don't let them trick you into thinking that it's no, it's not qualitative. Finding the cause and finding the effect is still identify risk. Now, when you begin to get into severity, if you will, high, medium, low, this is where you're getting into qualitative. So I'll just make that green. This is getting into qualitative risk analysis territory. The moment you're qualifying it as high, medium, low, you are getting into qualitative. Also, the probability ratings and the impact ratings, this is just another way of you doing qualitative. Okay? This is just another qualitative approach. I call this one being a bit lazy. So, you know, doing high, medium, low, in my mind, is a little bit lazy. It's a bit lazy in my opinion. But when you put numbers into it, like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, now you're becoming a little bit more intentional in your risk analysis. Because it's easy for someone to say, oh, that's a high risk. What do you mean by high? High in terms of cost, or high in terms of schedule, or high in terms of scope? What do you mean? Do you mean high in terms of probability? You see, it could be very ambiguous, and some firms use high, medium, low, and I don't think it's good enough. So if you're in one of such organizations, you need to make change. Get people to stop doing high, medium, low, and get them to start using this scale, some sort of scale. Okay, the easiest scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Ideally, in the PMBOK guide, they usually weigh the impact scale more, you know, because impact is everything. So people tend to weigh impact a little bit more in some organizations. But let's say we use a 1 to 5 and a 1 to 5. That's okay. But what you do need to remember is this stuff is all qualitative. This is all qualitative risk analysis. Okay. So when you put in your numbers on a scale, you are not quantitative. So don't let the question trick you by saying, oh, you got numbers 1 to 10. It's still qualitative. Why? Because anyone could say on a scale of 1 to 10 on my project, it's a 3. Is a 3 the same on my project as it is on Jason's project? No. What about Donna's project? No. They all have a relative ranking system. It's a relative ranking system. That's what it is. So it is qualitative. Now you're going to get to the point where you multiply the probability rating times the impact rating. And then you get the number here. So you can see 2 times 3, this 3 times this 2 gives 6. This is also qualitative. So saying high, medium, low, scoring the risk on a scale of 1 to 5 for impact and probability and multiplying them, that is all qualitative. So this is still qualitative risk analysis right here. All right, so qualitative risk analysis will generate your risk score if you're doing it right. In some organizations, it would just be a bland old high, medium, low, or it will be a red times a red, which is equally ineffective in my opinion. So qualitative risk analysis generates your risk score, okay? Something else that could give you a few free marks on the exam. All right, so when you are done with that, with your high, medium, low, or your probability rating times impact rating to get the risk score, the next stage is to begin to think in real probability terms. You're going beyond red, yellow, green. No, you're bringing in the experts. You're bringing in the big old Monte Carlos, and this is where it could get very, very intense in the real world. Now, on the exam, you don't have to worry so much about this in terms of, oh, I need to be able to run a Monte Carlo. No, you don't. You don't. But I often tell people who are very keen on knowing more about this to go check out a particular website. It's Palisade.com, Palisade.com. This is probably the best way for you to get superb Monte Carlo training because very few people use it and very few companies actually can support Monte Carlos or need Monte Carlos. See? So go to Palisade.com. I'm going to chat this in. You don't have to go there right now, but just keep this in your back pocket so that you can check out their website and see how a Monte Carlo simulation is really done. It is very intense in terms of the brain power and the thought processing, but for you project managers, it should be quite straightforward if you follow the basic webinar. So they've got some live webinars and on-demand webinars and some free videos. So this is stuff I did when I was getting ready for my exam. They got a software called At Risk for Excel. They've got At Risk for Project. I think back in the day, the first one I found was At Risk for Excel. I was quite impressed at how they were able to model the project and just predict stuff using a very simple add-on to MS Project or Excel. All right, so go check that out, and I'm sure it'll give you a good run for your time. But the reason why I brought this up is because in the real world, a lot of people do not do real quantitative risk analysis. They run away from it because they don't want to deal with numbers in front of management. They hate telling management the impact, the aggregate impact. So this is where quantitative is different from qualitative. Quantitative looks at the entire project. Aggregate. What is the aggregate effect of all of these risks on the project? What is the outcome going to be when all of these, or if all of these risks hit the project at some point? That is the key distinguishing factor. Now, to bring it into layman's theory and make it less ambiguous with the Monte Carlo, what you are doing in essence is you are taking the probability of occurrence on a scale of 1 or 0, if there's no probability, to 100, 100% of course being the biggest. You're taking that consciousness and awareness of probability and you are analyzing with experts. What is the probability of that risk that Phil talked about? What is the probability of it happening? Someone said, oh, it's a 10% chance of happening. How do you know that? Based on my expertise. So in your Monte Carlo, you're still putting in your human understanding. That's why if you put garbage into a Monte Carlo, you're going to get garbage out. So you better be putting in good data. So let's say we put in a risk probability of 10%, and let's say the impact. Did I just lose my sharing? Can you still see what I'm sharing? Did it vanish? Where did it go? Oh, there we go. Okay. Can you still see what I'm sharing? Yes, exactly. And I will come to that exactly. So quantitative risk analysis, my friend, in order to really think of it well, you need to think about probability on a scale of 0 to 100. If you toss a coin, the probability of getting a heads is a 50, 50%, tails, 50%. The risk impact in this case is $5. So the risk magnitude You got to be familiar with these terms, my friends, on the exam. The risk magnitude, EMV, expected monetary value, is another term you might have heard, is going to be probability times impact. So you probably remember that formula. EMV is equal to P times I, probability times impact. So if we put a few more in here, this is the idea. The idea is to assess all the risks in terms of their probability in percent, and assess all of the risks in terms of their impact, of course, using historical information, expert judgment, documents that are out there in public space, doing your thorough analysis. The idea is to assess them all, and at the end of the day, probability times impact for all of the different risks. And at the end of the day, you're going to get a final aggregate, if you will. Okay? Now, I'm making it very simple just to explain the concept in a way you can understand it. Otherwise, you have to go learn the Monte Carlo. All right? So let's just call it the total EMV. And let's say I was able to put that down here. So if I had some sort of total EMV amount, you would do this for all the risks, and then you will sum them up. What is the aggregate effect of all of the risks on the project? And you get the magic number of 107, and that is your total EMV. That is the total, if you will, exposure of your individual risk items, adding all of them up. So in a lot of organizations, which I don't think is very effective, but it's better than nothing. So a lot of organizations, they would take this number and they would make this their reserve. They'll make it a contingency reserve. Some project managers would do that. I've actually trained companies in which they do this. I mean, half a loaf is better than none. So when a rainy day does happen, these project managers have found that these reserves that they come up with seem to help them. But my question is always, what if the worst of the worst risk happens? So if you're assuming it's a 40% chance, but what if it does happen? Then it is 100%. And then you got a bigger problem to deal with. But that is how it is done in the real world, okay? For your exam, understanding that the risk analysis that is of a quantitative nature deals with real dollars, or you could use resource hours or some other quantitative measure, okay? So you're thinking of real currency or resource hours, okay? When you talk about quantitative, you need to remember that you are not just talking about numbers. Numbers does not necessarily mean quantitative. Numbers means you are analyzing, but when you say dollars and resource hours, you are making it a lot more quantitative. Okay? Do you have any questions? There was a good contribution from Yolanda a few minutes ago that you might have seen. And Yolanda said that this is the one that is optional. So if you get a question on the PMP exam or any other exam that says, which of the processes of risk management is optional? The answer is quantitative. Everyone else, the PMI expects you to do. So identify risks, do. Your risk management plan, do. Qualitative risk analysis, to some degree, do, even if you're using the lazy high, medium, low. Do. But when it gets to quantitative, hit the skip button if you do not have the capability to do it. Okay? Like I said, a lot of firms I train, they find all the risks, they do their risk probability, they bring in their little experts. They do their little number crunching, and it's not a Monte Carlo. And I say little not to diminish them, but in terms of a Monte Carlo, it's a beast. It's just a total beast. And when done the right way with the right brain power in the room, it is just tremendous. But without the right people in the room, of course, the efforts are somewhat diminished. But the argument is half a loaf is better than none. It's better to do some quantitative risk analysis on some projects, some people say. All right? So that is the difference between quantitative and qualitative. The big difference is what you're doing and how you're getting the numbers that you're putting forward. Now, with that said, I need to call your attention to another topic of risk management, which is rather significant, and this is decision tree analysis. Because where the Monte Carlo is talked about, there is an add-on topic of decision tree analysis. So have you guys solved any decision tree analysis problem? Because if you haven't, I'm going to give you one. I'm going to set it up a little bit, try and make it as easy as I can at first, and then we're going to have to go a little bit deeper. All right, so here is the idea about decision tree analysis. Let me share the whiteboard. So the dogma regarding decision tree analysis is in the PMBOK guide. I'm going to open my electronic version. And the best page to study this is where you've got that notorious example on page 435. Okay? It says here, decision trees are used to support selection of the best of several alternative courses of action. You see that, page 435? Okay? It says alternative paths through the project are shown in the decision tree using branches representing different decisions or events, each of which can have associated costs and related individual project risks, including both threats and opportunities. The endpoints of branches in the decision tree represent the outcome from following that particular path, which can be negative or positive. The decision tree is evaluated by calculating the expected monetary value, the EMV. There we go again with EMV. So calculating the EMV of each branch. That is how you do your decision tree analysis. Now, if you go down to the figure and you look at the notes, they're a little bit small, but it says, note 1, the decision tree shows how to make a decision between alternative capital strategies, represented as decision nodes, when the environment contains uncertain elements represented as chance nodes. So the question I often get is, Phil, so that means this does not happen in the middle of the project. This happens like in the beginning. And the answer is yes, this happens at the beginning of a project or at the beginning of a phase. So you got to look at your different options and say, which of these makes the most sense? Which one should we do? And that's what this is. So let's read. The more you can understand this language, the better it's going to be for us on the exam. So it says here, a decision is being made, note 2, a decision is being made whether to invest 120 million US dollars to build a new plant or to instead invest only $50 million to upgrade the existing plant. For each decision, the demand, which is uncertain and therefore represents a chance node, must be accounted for. For example, strong demand leads to $200 million revenue, and you can see that. So let us uncover what exactly is happening here. I know some of you are already like all over this, but for the sake of those who are not, we have this project, build or upgrade. And it starts off with the project box, that shows you this is the situation at hand. And it is, should we build or upgrade? Build or upgrade. And then you can see the legend. Decision nodes are those squares. Chance nodes are the circles. And the end of the branch is that triangle. So it starts off with building the new plant as an option. And you can see that node going into that first possible choice, if you will, because you're really making a decision. So without drawing the decision node and getting all fancy, I'm just going to draw arrows. This is a point where you make a decision. So on the exam, if you need to draw an image, you need to remember, okay, this is a decision versus the chance of gain or loss. So you make a decision here to build. I'm going to build a new plant. So if you build a new plant, you are going to be investing 120 million. This money is very important because the money you are investing is ultimately going to affect your profit. So you do not want to forget that you are investing 120 million. So for that reason, I will put this in a different color just so you do not lose sight of the monies. The monies are important. So let's put that in red. Invest 120 million. Okay. In the same token, you could decide to upgrade the plant. Okay, but we will come back to that later on. Let's just focus on what happens if we build a new plant. If you build a new plant, there is a chance node. Just remember that. And the chance node is there could be a high demand or strong demand, and then there could be a weak demand. So they would likely give you a question that says, your project manager or you're a business manager, you got two options to either build or upgrade. They will dress it up and explain it like you can see in note 2. All right. So here we can see there is a chance. How do we know these chances? Through analysis, through market research, through historical information of comparable endeavors. But whatever the case, we get data that tells us, oh, there could be a strong demand. If there is a strong demand, there's a possibility that your revenues could be up to 200 million. So if there is a strong demand, you could get 200 million. It doesn't sound bad, especially since we only put in 120 million. But there could also be a weak demand. So there's a possibility of a strong demand, but there's also a possibility of a weak demand. So you got to look at both sides to the coin. If you take a look at the percentages, that is what tells the story of what is happening here. What is really happening here is you're seeing 100% of an event being broken into pieces. So 60% strong demand, 40% weak demand. That's really what's happening here. It adds up to 100 typically on these questions. There's some they may try to trick you by not letting it all add up to 100, but it typically does. So if we look at the weak demand, the revenue is significantly less and it's only 80 million. And taking a look at the numbers that we've got 60% here 60% of occurrence, 60% chance that could happen. And then for this one, we've got a 40% chance. So now we've built up the scenario. We understand that this is revenue we're talking about in this box. Revenue. What is revenue? Revenue is your profit plus your cost. So what we're saying here is the profit plus the cost is 200 million. So what is the profit? Think about it. If your profit plus your cost is 200 million, and you know what your cost or investment is, then what is the profit? Think about that for a while. See if you can give me an answer. And then we go from there. What do you think? What's the profit? Any answers? What's the profit? So taking a look at the strong demand, let's say you get 200 million and you invested 120 million. What is the profit? What would your profit be? Thank you, 80 million. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Krishnan. That's what I'm looking for. Very good. So guys, you need to always ask, what's the profit? The profit is 80 million. So we're going to take a look at both the strong demand. What we're going to do, we're going to take a look at this one, the strong demand. We're going to find the profit, and then we are going to multiply that amount that we find the profit to be. We're going to multiply that by the percentage, but we're going to convert this percent into a decimal. And then we're going to have an outcome. We're going to put the outcome here. Oh, let's do that in blue. All right. So we're going to put our outcome here so you guys can keep track of what is happening. All right. So I asked you, please tell me what the revenue is, or the profit is based on the revenue and the investment, which you did. And the outcome we're going to use to find the EMV pieces for each one. So to find the EMV for the strong, let's use a different color here. Bear with me. I want you to keep track of what we're doing so you don't get lost. Let's make this yeah, that should work. Or yellow. 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 Okay. So the setup, it's very important you don't, once you get one of them, the rest is easy. And that's really why I'm taking the pain to make it as clear as possible. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the EMV for the strong. So I'll just say strong EMV. And that is going to be equal to what? The percentage. Remember, it is always probability times impact. What is the probability here? 60% or 0.6 in decimal times the impact, which is the profit. The profit is 200 minus 120 million. Remember that. Let's spread it all out. 120 million, 200 million minus 120 million. And that's going to be equal to what? 0.6 times 80 million. Remember, it's dollars. And that is going to give you 48 million. All right. Understanding how all of this pans out is very important. Thank you, Ilanda and Jan. Awesome. Awesome. Very good. So if this makes sense to you, then the next one will make sense as well. The next one, we are going to do this for the weak demand. So let's put another box here. And we already know the formula. So we're just going to take the numbers again. We're going to say probability times impact. The probability in this case is 40% or 0.4. So we're going to say weak demand is equal to 0.4 times, what is the revenue? 80 million minus 120 million. And that is going to give you a minus, a negative. See that? And that is going to be 0.6 times, or 0.4 times minus 40. Minus 30, I beg your pardon. 90, oh, did I get that wrong? Is it 90? Oh, I'm so sorry. So the weak demand is 90. I did not see that. Okay, so let's put 90 in here. And this is going to be 0.4 times. So you already know it's weak demand. Let me take that out. It's going to be 0.4 times 30. 30 million. And that's going to give you what? 12 million. And then minus 12 million. I'm sorry, minus 12 million. I need to put my glasses on. Okay, minus 12 million. All right. Now let me tweak this up just to show that this is 90 million. Okay. So here we go. 90 million weak demand. Weak demand is 90 million. All right, so that is how the setup is. And at the end of the day, you get 48 million and you get minus 12 million and you add them up. So let's put that here. And we'll just put the number. We should probably use a different color. Okay, let's use this. Okay, so this signifies the outcome for build new. And as you can see in the PMBOK guide, what they did, they just took the 48 and the minus 12, and it says the EMV is equal to 48 minus 12, and that is equal to what? 36 million. All right, so I'm not going to spend all the time going through the next branch. That should be quite straightforward for you guys to do on your own. I really want to maximize time doing other things, but ultimately you would create a box for, the upgrade plant. And if you look in the PMBOK guide, you see the solution to everything else. You just keep following. Same thing I did, just follow along, create the boxes, understand what you're doing. And ultimately you get to the point where you do all the math and then you compare this for build new to what you're going to get for upgrade. Okay, so the box here, ultimately upgrade, you're going to have the final solution give you 50, no, I beg your pardon, going to give you 46 million. So you're going to say 42 plus 4, and you're going to get 46 million. So upgrade EMV is going to be 46 million. And from your analysis, you are going to choose upgrade because that gives you the best bang for your buck. Okay, it gives you the best outcome, the highest EMV. That's really what you're going for. Okay, now with this in mind, can I give you guys a problem to solve? Because I really want to make sure you guys can do this. Can I give you a problem to solve? Are you game? Oh, where did the 90 come from? So we're under the 90. I put 80 instead of 90 previously. It should have been 90. And they'll give you all that information. I'm sorry, I missed a lot of the chats. Okay. Yeah, does it all make sense? Does anyone have any questions? Thank you, Greg. I'm just seeing your chats. Thank you, Donna. I actually missed that like right from the get-go. Yeah. So those of you following along, you should be all caught up and understand the book. Taking a look at the PMBOK guide, page 435, I just did not see properly. I should go get my glasses or make my iPad brighter. I should probably make it brighter. There we go. All right. So Willanda says you would go with a higher number. Yes, you would go with the higher number because the higher number shows you bigger bang for your buck. So here we're looking at positive risks. We're looking at the opportunity. The larger the opportunity, the better. If you're looking at negative risks, then of course you would want the lesser. But we use this to explore, as they said, opportunities. Okay. I believe some people would probably use this for anything. You could if you wanted to. All right. So let us go to the problem I had. I just wanted to give a preamble for those who are not quite used to this. But now it's time for us to take a look at an actual decision tree analysis problem. I would like you guys to attempt doing it closed book. So just act like you do not have the PMBOK guide in front of you. Just act as though you've seen all of this for the very first time outside of, or seen this on the exam, I should say. Okay, so there's a lot of text. I want to give you guys an example of what you could get. I want to make it too easy by giving you an image. So all I'm going to give you for now is text. So here we go. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to solve it and just exercise your risk management muscle. Here we go. All right. So you are the CEO of Amuse Me Inc. and you should know what to do. I'll be back in 5 minutes to see what you come up with. Have fun. Okay, I'm going to give you a little timer so that we can keep track. All right, it seems like our time is up. So, what is the EMV for either option, and what did you figure out to do? Build or upgrade? Build or revamp? So we got 4.5, says Krishnan, and 3.8. And everyone says build. So let's see what the answer is. Here is a solution. So you drew out your nodes and all that stuff, and you got to the point where you realized this was the picture. You throw in the revenue and subtracted the investment. You did that for both the weak and the strong, and you got 4.5. Lots of you got 4.5. Awesome. Very good. And you did the same for the other option. For revamp, you got 4.2 and 0.4 and 3.8. Bravo. Build new. Fantastic. So you guys, I expect you guys to be able to just have fun with this stuff when you find it on the exam. Very, very good. Okay. Well, after an exercise like that, I kind of make it mandatory for you guys to get a couple of minutes. So I'm going to give you a little bio break. I'm going to let you stretch your legs, grab a drink of water. I'm going to start the clock again, and I'm going to give you this time 2 minutes, or let me say 3. 3 is probably more ideal because it might take you time to get up. So I'm going to start the 3-minute clock, and then when we come back, we are going to move on to some actual data flows regarding these processes. And I am going to be giving you, like I said, questions for you to answer. So let's take a quick 3-minute break. I would have loved to do 5, but that's a luxury at this point. So 3-minute clock coming up. I'll see you in 3 minutes. almost up. That's it. Time up. Well, let's get moving again. So welcome back. So we're going to accelerate a little bit here, and we're going to take a look at a few more deep details, maybe a few deeper details. And I will ask you questions as we Okay, I think you guys just lost me. So, Greg, I was trying to say that in the book, you have that same problem. Let me tell you what page it's on. But it's in your Project Management Essentials book on page. Oh, that may not be entirely true. Hang on. I thought it was. It actually is not. You got a different problem. You got a more terrible problem to deal with in the book. The book has got three. It's got three stems. So let me bring up that question again. Yeah. Interestingly enough, for those of you who have got the book on page 408, 407, 408, you got a more fun problem to solve in the book. So you might want to go take a look at that. But as far as the question that Greg was asking, let me try to pull that up for you. Okay. So I will just give, do you want the text or do you want the image? Do you want the image, Greg, so you can take a screenshot? Or which one? Image? Okay. So let me show you the image first. Here we go. All right, so here is the image with all of the information on it. All right. Krishnan says the net path value payoffs minus cost along path. Does this mean net path value is, yes, net path value for the build new. So if you look at build new, right, it's broken into two. So you have to find the path value for strong demand, path value for weak demand, and add them up. And that is the net path value considering the strong and the weak. So yeah, the net path value is 4.5 in the case of build new. And oh, you're looking at the previous problem. Are we looking at the previous problem or this one? Oh, you're talking about the PMBOK guide problem or this problem? So the net path value, yes. So the net path value here would be 4.5 for build new and 3.8 for revamp. Yeah. All right, very good. Well, let's get a move on again so that we can hit our quota. We have got a few more key pieces to address. There is quite a lot of stuff in this chapter. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just drop some gold, as I typically call it, for this section. I call it getting to the gold zone, just so that you know what you could face on the exam. There is a lot of content I really wish I could talk about tonight, but I don't think we're going to have the luxury of doing that. So unfortunately, we may not be able to do as I had hoped. So let's just go on and finish off with our high-level review. If I have enough time, I will come back to ask you these questions that I have laid out for you. I have quite a lot of questions I wanted us to go through. All right, so I was showing you the Excel file, and we got to the point where we did quantitative risk analysis, and then we changed over to decision trees. But if I were to go back to that Excel sheet, what I would tell you is that you do implement risk responses after you've planned your responses. We examine the 5 strategies for positive and negative. So in your risk register, you could also document what those would look like. Okay. Now, I should probably show that to you just to bring it 360. So let me show you that piece of the missing piece of what happens in plan risk responses. Okay, let me show you that. Hold on. So let's go back to that Excel sheet. And taking a look at the Excel sheet here, we have a column for risk owner, a column for risk action owner, and we have a column for risk response. So this is where you would describe the response. See? You would describe it here, put a little description. Describe the response. You would also put in the name of the risk owner. In other words, the person who came up with the idea for you to counteract the risk in a particular way described in the response, or the person whose objectives are being affected. So the risk owner is Phil. The risk action owner is the person who is carrying out the risk response. So Jill will carry out this response. And let's say it's a mitigate response. We would say, oh, this is mitigate. Okay. So all of the stuff we're doing here, we call it planning our risk responses. This is plan risk responses. And then the next step after all of this will be to implement whatever we describe in our response. So Jill will have to carry out whatever we described. Phil, she'll report to Phil and tell Phil, hey, this is what happened, or these are the problems I'm facing. And the status should be kept. So we could say it's been implemented, or you could say the risk has passed, or you could say it's closed, and however you want to, peg the status. But the bottom line is your monitor risks is when you're now going to be doing this. So you can think of this as a way of you tracking. This is really more of your monitor risk than anything else. So monitoring it, making sure it's right where you left it, and so on. So you can say this is monitor. And your implement risk responses, you could also have some sort of tracker for your implementation. You could have a kind of implementation report of sorts, or some implementation status or update, whatever you want to call it. Now, this is not in the PMBOK guide, but this is how you would do it in the real world. In the real world, you want to keep track of what you're implementing, when it was implemented, what the result was, or result, or what have you. So you could call this implement. Just like that. And then monitor risks over there. And when you're monitoring risks, if any of the information changes, like the impact in dollars has changed, or your ratings somewhat have changed, you need to go back and adjust that, update it, and just keep track accordingly. All right. So I wanted to give you a full picture. I didn't just want to, stop there, because understanding this full picture is very important. All right. So let's go back to what I was showing you along the lines of what to expect on the exam. So we'll get started with the very first process, plan risk management. So in plan risk management, your major goal here is to produce your risk management plan. And part of putting your risk management plan together is going to involve you analyzing your stakeholders to know how they react to risks based on their attitudes, their tolerance. Are they risk tolerant? Are they risk averse? Do they not like taking risks? What kind of tolerance do they have? Are they very risk tolerant? What kind of risk appetite have they got? Do they like taking on a lot of risk in order to pursue an opportunity? What is their risk threshold? So your risk threshold really defines your tolerance or your aversion to risks. So all of this information should be looked at, and you should get a definition, an overall stakeholder profile when it comes to risk management. And at the end of this process, you're going to get your risk management plan. Your risk management plan is very robust. I would like you guys to read up some more information about this on your own. But for the sake of our class today, I'm going to show you very rapidly what is in here. This is going to be pretty quick and scrappy. But inside your risk management plan, first of all, you have your overarching strategy. This is on page 405. Under your risk strategy, you have the general approach to managing risk. And then you've got the methodology. What tools are we going to use? What is our approach going to be? This is where you now get into more detail, more tactical detail. The roles and responsibilities of people who are going to support risk efforts is also here. The funding also needs to be discussed. Who's going to provide the funds for all these risk activities? The timing. When are we going to meet to discuss risk? Oh, during the weekly meeting. That stuff needs to be talked about. Risk categories. How are you going to categorize risks? Because you know, in perform qualitative, you might want to write this down. In perform qualitative risk analysis, this is where you categorize the risks as well. You see? So risk categorization is something that you're going to do, but your risk management plan will tell you the how. What categories will we use? And to do that, we have the risk breakdown structure. I believe I spoke about this in passing a few days back. This is on page 406. So you've got a breakdown of risk: technical, management, commercial, external, for example. And then you've got the risk appetite. Like I said, are your stakeholders very hungry? Do they want to take on a massive risk in order to pursue an equally huge opportunity? So how much risk are they willing to take on? All that stuff, it has to be understood. And then the definitions of risk, probability, and impact. So if you say a risk is high, what do you mean? All of that has to be defined in your risk management plan. So as you can see in table 11-1, it shows you examples of definitions for probability and impacts. On this scale, anything greater than 70% probability is looked at as a very high probability. Anything greater than 6 months is looked at a very high schedule risk. Anything greater than $5 million is looked at as a very high cost risk. But on the flip side, anything looked at as less than 100K is looked at as very low. You see why when we use these scales, we say it's qualitative? Because on your project, 100K may be massive. On my project, it might not be that much. So the bottom line is you're getting your risk management plan, and it contains all of those details. If you turn the page over, you've got the probability and impact matrix. Your probability and impact matrix is also part of your documents that you're putting into this potpourri of information for your risk management plan. Now, it's not looked at as a standalone risk document, but it's looked at as one of the things you use to invoke the tool and technique, probability and impact assessment. But all of this, how should our risk register look? How should our probability and impact matrix be formatted? What are the reporting formats? How are we going to track risks? There is a boatload, my friends, in the risk management plan. So I'm giving you a little assignment here. Read pages 405 to page 408 very carefully. Understand that even though we're not using it here in plan risk management, we need to define what will our risk register look like? What will our risk report look like? What kind of probability times impact matrix will we use for this project? What is our risk strategy going to be? What is our risk methodology going to be? What tools, what techniques will we use? What is our reporting format going to be? So on and so forth. There's a ton of stuff in this plan, okay? On the exam, what I expect them to give you, going into the gold zone, is pretty much anything that's in the risk management plan. You got to know. Something else that is noteworthy is your stakeholder register is an input here because you're doing a stakeholder analysis. And some of that information is going to permeate into your risk management plan. You're going to profile these stakeholders, okay? So on the exam, I wouldn't be surprised if they test you on the risk, the stakeholder register, and the stakeholder analysis leading up to your risk management plan. You got to know how it all weaves together. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to confuse you about the project charter being different from your risk register. So your risk register contains details, but it's not here. It's in the next process, I know, but you need to be aware that they may try to confuse you about the risk register versus the charter as its use here in plan risk management is because high-level risks are in the charter. So knowing some of the high-level risks that could affect the project, knowing that is going to impact how seriously you take risks and may also prompt some of the methods that you use to manage risk. All right, so that is the very first process. Let's talk about the next one, identify risks. What are we doing in identify risks? We are determining which risks may affect the project and their characteristics. You're playing detective, lots of interaction between you and your team members. You're using iterative thinking, you're brainstorming, you're staying out of the box to imagine the worst. You're identifying risks in an iterative fashion throughout the life cycle. You're always on the alert. You're always being creative. The level of rigor regarding this depends on the project size and complexity and many other factors. Bear in mind, you can identify risks using a WBS. Okay, you can identify risks using a variety of methods we're going to take a look at. So go to page 409 and we'll soon hit the table that you're seeing there. But the beginnings of risk identification is this model: cause, risk, and effect. Cause, risk, and effect. That is the model. If you've only identified the risks, you're not done. That's not enough. Because if we know the root cause, we can attack many risks with a similar root cause. Okay? So going into page 409, figure 11-6, you can see there's a boatload of components. Let me explain this to you very, very quick. Why do we have all of these plans and baselines? Because risks could exist in all of these. Oh, okay. So if risks could exist in all of these, it probably would make sense to identify which risks could potentially be in here by doing a review of not just my project management plan components, but also my project documents. I should probably review all of these. What is the logic? There could be risks in my requirements management plan, how I'm collecting requirements, how we are going about managing the schedule and cost and quality and resources and risk. Our scope baseline could be used to identify risks, but then we could also have risks buried in there and in our cost baseline as well. So we need to review all of these. Okay, next, we want to look at our assumptions. We want to do an assumptions and constraints analysis to make sure that these are really valid, that we didn't miss anything. We want to take a look at our various estimates to see if there are risks hidden in our cost, our duration. We want to take a look at issues at hand and see if that generates any risk discovery. Lessons learned from previous projects could help us discover risks on this one. Requirements documentation could also give rise to us identifying risks, taking a look at those resource requirements as well, and the stakeholder register, because we're going to call these folks in to help us identify the risks anyway. So these planning components and these documents, coupled with the contract, so agreements, just remember contracts are in there. Procurement documentation could also be riddled with risks in some instances. The choice of the procurement or contracting vehicle could also be something you want to think of. And if your contract is at risk, you need to unravel those risks. Also, there could be some decisions that you make of a procurement nature. You might need to purchase insurance and things like that. So it gets very integrated and interwoven. Okay, and that is why this whole discussion about what is an input to identify risks, it goes on for many, many pages. Okay, after about 3 pages, which is quite a lot for those inputs, and I mean it's a wall of text talking about each one, you finally get to the tools and techniques. Okay, so getting to the tools and techniques here. Where are we? Okay, page 415, I think it is, or 14. We finally encounter the tools and techniques. This is where a lot of fun begins. So the tools and techniques for identifying risks. You can brainstorm with your team. You can use a checklist to go through, have we checked that? Have we checked that? Have we checked that? Interviews could be used. You can interview people to find risks. Root cause analysis, identifying the root cause. And that's why I said the cause risk effect model is very helpful. Assumption and constraint analysis, taking a look at your assumptions and constraints, looking for risks in there, making sure they're valid. SWOT analysis, analyzing your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats, is going to help you uncover positive and negative risks. Now this one, document analysis on page 415, it says risks may be identified from a structured review of project documents, including but not limited to plans, assumptions, constraints, previous project files. So what are they saying? This little itty bitty bullet that looks so innocent here, this is going to be used on all of these guys here and all of these guys here. You are going to do a document analysis. You're going to analyze your documents and go on a hunt for risks. So that's what document analysis is used for. It's a very, very powerful thing. I know it's just one tiny bullet, but that is the relevance of all of those documents and plans. So it says uncertainty or ambiguity in project documents, as well as inconsistencies with a document or between different documents, may be indicators of risk on the project. So we want to uncover all of that. You need impeccable facilitation skills, because people go off on tangents in risk meetings when you're identifying risks. We want to stop at just the risk, but people go off on a tangent giving you the whole story of War and Peace about how to manage that risk, but that's not really what you're looking for. So it's important that you keep the team members on the straight and narrow. So facilitation on the next page, a very important skill. It says interpersonal and team skills that can be used for this include, but are not limited to, facilitation. Facilitation improves the effectiveness of many of the techniques used to identify individual project risk and sources of overall project risk. Now the next one, this is a rather robust definition that we have under prompt list, because it goes into some specific examples of prompt list models. So I have a slide here that I would like to show you just to make sure you retain that information about prompt lists. So let's read. It says, I'll show it to you. It says a prompt list is a predetermined list of categories that may give rise to individual project risk and that could also act as sources of overall project risk. So the model here is as follows. Let me get this for you. So breaking it down bit by bit, we got the PESTLE, which is taking a look at any political related risks, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. It's called a PESTLE, P-E-S-T-L-E. The next one is a teacup, pronounced teacup. We got technical, environmental, commercial, operational, and political. So as you guys are identifying risks in your company, you could bring these out to prompt them to think of specific risks that fall under these umbrellas. And the last one is VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It is worth knowing these because we do not know whether these could appear on the exam. I believe they could. So we always want to make sure we cover our bases. All right, so that's prompt lists. And then meetings. And the major outcomes we get from this are your risk register, which I've spent a significant amount of time showing you, and your risk report. So let's read the risk report on 418. It says, the risk report presents information on sources of overall project risk, together with summary information on identified individual project risk. And this is where it differs from your risk register. This has got higher level information about identified individual project risks, but it looks at sources of overall project risk. It says a risk report is developed progressively throughout the project risk management process. The results of perform qualitative, quantitative, plan risk responses, implement risk responses, and monitor risks are also included in the risk report. So you could cut out of your risk register, whittle it down, and give it back to management. Management doesn't want to see the whole risk register. Just give it to them short and sweet. So it says, information in the risk report may include sources of overall project risk, indicating which are the most important drivers of overall project risk exposure, and summary information on identified individual project risk, like the number of identified threats, number of identified opportunities, how they are distributed, the distribution of risks across the categories, metrics, and trends. So short and sweet, high level, a tool that management can use. On the exam, I expect you to be tested, my friends, on very heavily these tools and techniques. So know what brainstorming is, know why you're using checklists and how the interviews might look, and begin to go through these in your mind, like staging a scenario. It helps put it all together. So put yourself into a facilitation scenario. You are facilitating the identification of risks. How would you brainstorm? What else could you use in addition to brainstorm? Regarding prompt lists, which prompt list will fit your particular team? Will it be PESTLE or TCOP or VUCA? And try to remember those components. And then regarding these big buckets of documents and plans, you got to remember that your document analysis is tied to those. It's worth opening agreements because we don't really find this very much. So let's read the relevance of agreements here as an input just really quick. So if we go to page 413, it says, if the project requires external procurement of resources, the agreements may have information such as milestone dates, contract types, acceptance criteria, awards, and penalties that can present threats or opportunities. So again, understanding the relevance of that. Going to the next one. So that should actually read 5, and then this should read procurement documentation. If the project requires external procurement of resources, the initial procurement documentation should be reviewed, as procuring goods and services from outside may increase or decrease overall project risk. So there's quite a lot of information to be digested in these sections. I would like you to pay close attention to those for your exam. This is definitely one of the favorites of question writers, identify risks, because that's where you get your risk report, should say report. And then regarding these other ones here, you got to know what those are, and the lessons learned register. Whenever you see that, you want to ask yourself, okay, what are we updating in our lessons learned register in this one? It says here on page 418, the lessons learned register can be updated with information on techniques that were effective in identifying risks to improve performance in later phases or other projects. So the PMI, they've added the lessons learned register to the PMBOK guide, and they're very big on always keeping up with whatever is newly identified as value. Qualitative risk analysis, we don't need to spend too much time here because you guys saw it in action, right? We took a look at the risk register. This is where we would prioritize identified risks in order. So that table that I showed you in Excel, you could show the largest risk to smallest risk in terms of the score, and those that come to the surface as far as having the largest score, those are the ones that are prioritized typically. Now, some firms may also do a risk urgency assessment to identify those risks happening in the near term versus those in the long term. And some firms may choose to analyze the risk from an impact perspective majorly. So if it's a big impact, even if the probability is low, they're going to prioritize dealing with that risk. All right, so qualitative risk analysis considers a time frame. When is it going to occur? What is the risk tolerance in the firm? What is the cost associated with a particular response, and so on and so forth, or a particular risk? And then based on the amount of that risk, if you do your risk score and you realize, wow, in terms of the impact, this is big, that could bump it up for some preferred treatment when it comes to quantitative and planning the risk response. Okay, so the key word, like I was telling you, is relative. See, Jason's project, it's a 3 in terms of probability. My project, it's a 3. It may not mean entirely the same thing. He may be using a 1 to 10 scale. I may be using a 1 to 5 scale. So it's always important to remember we are in qualitative, all right? And it considers time frames for response. So you could look at a risk and say, all right, this one is going to happen tomorrow. If we don't do something about it today, there's no point, or we're in trouble type of thing. So the probability and impact matrix, this is where you use it. So remember, you have already outlined how it will look in plan risk management, but here, this is where you use it. And then the cause, risk, and effect, you're going to score for each risk that you found the cause and effect, you're going to score it. And all of that information, like I showed you, is put into the register. Okay, so in qualitative, the really big things here are understanding that you're doing a risk data quality assessment, because you're looking at your risk data and saying, is this good data or bad data? How do you know if it's good data? Your risk register is an input under project documents. So you're going to take a look at your risk register. An expert will look through it and say, I smell biases. This person is biased about risks that are otherwise trivial. Why? And you realize, you dig into the details and you realize the whole register is corrupt. It was not collected properly. This data was not collected properly. So you could do a risk data quality assessment, and that comes after risks have been identified. And then you also want to do a risk probability and impact assessment, taking a look at probability and impact to score the risk. So your risk register, again, is relevant because you need your risk register to score those risks. Now, there are assessments of other risk parameters that are talked about in a PMBOK guide. Let's take a look at these very quick, and you need to get familiar with these for your exam. So on page 424, that is where the itemization of what started on page 423 actually is. So 423 is where the dialogue actually starts, but 424 is where you see the bullets. So other risk parameters, apart from probability and impact, those are great. But sometimes you need to up the ante and kind of explore other parameters to distinguish between what should be bumped up and what should be just left to fall to the bottom of the risk pile. So urgency, period of time within which a response to a risk is to be implemented in order to be effective. If we don't do it now, our response is not going to be effective. Urgency. Or proximity, it says the period of time before the risk might have an impact on one or more project objectives. Is it close? Is it far? If we say the proximity is high, it means we've got a short period before it impacts an objective. Dormancy is like the sleeping giant. Dormancy is the period of time that may elapse after a risk has occurred before its impact is discovered. So the risk has happened, you didn't even realize the impact that it has because that dormancy factor is high. So a short period indicates low dormancy. A long period means high dormancy, asleep for a long time, if you will. We've got manageability, how easy it is to manage, controllability, how easy it is to control the outcome of the risk, detectability, how easy is it to detect the risk, connectivity, the extent to which it is related to other individual project risks. So if you say, oh, high connectivity, it means it's connected to a number of other risks. Strategic impact, the potential for the risk to have a positive or negative effect on the organization's strategic goals. So you can say strategic impact is high if it's going to affect your strategic goals. And then we've got propinquity, which is a very curious word that a lot of people that I've encountered say, that can't be a real word, but it is. Propinquity is the degree of mattering, how much it matters to a stakeholder. So if a stakeholder says, this is very important, this risk is so important, you have to do something about it, we could say propinquity is high. So it's the perceived significance, which could vary across stakeholders. All right, so that is your assessment of other risk parameters. Facilitation is a no-brainer. Risk categorization, remember we've got our risk management plan, and we're going to use our risk breakdown structure to categorize those risks. So this is talked about on page 425. And if you read, you realize they're saying you could use your risk breakdown structure, or you could use your WBS to categorize risks. So that is important for you to remember. Not only can you use your RBS, you could use the work packages that they're tied to categorize those risks. All right, and then we got the probability and impact matrix we've talked about. Hierarchical charts is here in the PMBOK guide, but there is a mistake on page 426. So I'm not sure if your detectability is showing low on the left and high on the right, because we do not think detectability being low is good. So it should actually be reversed. There was a video that I had, actually this image is from my buddy, Dr. David Hilson, the risk doctor. But when he gave it to the publisher, the illustrator, they made a mistake, and hence we can see it is saying low detectability is good. No, it's not. So where it says small bubbles in this area are acceptable, it should actually show high detectability. So you should show high on the left, not low. So anyway, we got that modeled up in the PMBOK guide. But the bottom line is the size of the bubbles shows you the impact value. Okay? So on the exam, my friends, I really expect a lot of questioning about some of these, you know, propinquity, manageability, and understanding the use of the matrices and how the risks are scored. Okay, how the risks are scored. Now we're running out of time here. We don't have very much time. So I'm going to address the big ticket items in the rest of these areas. To be quite honest with you, it is very repetitive beyond our next process. And the next process that we're taking a look at is perform quantitative risk analysis. So in perform quantitative risk analysis, a quick reminder, we are finding the aggregate effect of risks on the project. It won't be a very good idea to give you this question, or you will definitely not leave here very quickly. So let us just go straight to quantitative. Quantitative risk analysis, you can see the major new stuff is this. So we've talked about the Monte Carlo, that's simulation. Sensitivity analysis, which uses the tornado diagram. Get familiar with that lingo in the PMBOK guide about the tornado diagram. It's used for sensitivity analysis. And then we took a look at decision tree analysis. Influence diagrams are diagrams of a particular nature that is used to show you how pieces of a problem fit together, and it helps you solve problems. That is really what this is. They don't have an example in this edition, but they used to have an example of influence diagrams. let me chat into you a video that I think may help you, because we're running out of time here, and I think watching the video on your own will be more productive. So let me give you this link. To watch the video. Actually, I should give you a couple of links. I should give you a link to take a quiz to underscore what we're talking about. But anyway, here's the link for the influence diagram. Just bookmark it and watch it. I think you'll find it interesting. It goes into a little bit more detail than what you have in the PMP guide. And as far as the risk, here is the link for the risk 5-minute drill. It's actually 6 minutes. 6-minute drill, okay? That is going to help us put some of the information in context. But let me round this up really quickly for you, okay? All right, so quantitative risk analysis, that's pretty much it. On the exam, I expect you to be tested on the nitty-gritty of quantitative. Understanding the difference between quantitative and qualitative is going to be big on the exam. So giving you a scenario and saying, what is this? It is important that you know what is qualitative and what is quantitative. I think we spent our time well by taking a look at EMV. Otherwise, we would have had to do it here. All right, the next one, plan risk responses. We've actually done a great job in this as well. So on the exam, going straight to the gold zone, on the exam, I would expect you to be tested very heavily on the strategies for threats, strategies for opportunities, contingent response strategies. Those ones we took a look at. Those are going to be your big ticket items. All of these updates are really as a result of the options you choose. Based on the options you choose, you may have to update the scope. Maybe you've decided to mitigate, and that's added more scope and more cost and more schedule, more time in the schedule, and so on and so forth. All right. We use multi-criteria decision analysis to decide upon a course of action. So contrary to what some people think about a risk response plan, there is no risk response plan. The risk response plan is really updating your risk register with actions you're going to carry out, okay? So bear with me, I might go a couple over. The next one, implement risk responses, is where we are actually implementing the risk responses. Not a good idea to give you a question at this point, but you can see it's very lean and mean, because all you're doing is you're using influence to nudge people who are meant to be doing stuff. So let's say we're working on a project, Greg is a project manager, he could use influence to get Phil to do what he needs to do by using whatever influence is possible. You know, leadership is influence, you know, not position, but being able to move Phil to actually carry out those responses, especially when Phil doesn't report to him. So you're using this influence, you're getting traction. If any change requests need to happen, those are generated, but ultimately you are updating your risk register and your risk report with the result of what happened from your responses, okay? So on the exam, I expect them to give you questions, you know, regarding someone carrying out a response and having you distinguish between planning for a response and actually doing the response. So if someone says, we're going to purchase insurance for this risk, implement risk responses is actually purchasing the insurance. Whether it ends up being used in that regard or not, purchasing the insurance is really the implementation of the strategy. Okay? And then going to our final one here, going to monitor risks. Monitor risk is a powerful process, folks. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but I just want to call out one, technical performance analysis. And this is where you look at your technical milestones and say, oh, did we achieve them? If you didn't get to functionality you said you would, that is a risk.
because it could keep going that way and you're late. That's a schedule risk. Reserve analysis is going to analyze whether you have enough schedule reserves, cost reserve, whatever the reserve is, you know, within your contingencies for those risks. Or for those, I beg your pardon, those tasks or activities. So for every risk that you identify, if it's affecting a particular schedule objective, you need to have enough reserves in there. Risk audits, you want to periodically assess how well your risk response strategy is going. If your risk response strategy isn't working, that should be uncovered in a risk audit. And as part of these risk planning meetings, we could review risks, we could take a look at risks that have changed, we could update risks with new information, or the PM could go away with that information and update it on her own or on his own. All right, the outputs, WPI as usual, WPD going in. This is a bit of an anomaly, so I'm going to use purple for this one. Work performance reports does not appear in many places. You need to take note that you're getting that report so that, again, you can do various analyses, and ultimately you're going to update your risk register with findings of your analysis, okay? So on the exam, what do I expect? These guys right here are big. These ones, most especially the work performance reports, maybe how that pans into this, but I really think the work performance reports is going to be important, and knowing what exactly is being updated in your risk register, that is also huge. Okay. So that is pretty much it. I have a number of questions to ask you, but I'm going to give you one of the cheaper ones, just to make sure you can get out quick. Okay, let me give you just one question, one. It's amazing. Today went on a lot of teaching and not so much a lot of quizzes, but here we go. Do you want to take a shot at this? Just go for it. I'll take anything you give me at this point. I know we're behind. Take anything you give me. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, 10 seconds. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. You guys are awesome. I appreciate your patience. So you went over by 5 minutes, thereabouts. So the answer to this is A, because you've done implement risk responses. What should follow? It cannot be planned procurement management, cannot be planned risk responses. We should have already done that, right? Because it says you are now implementing approved actions. So what you're doing is implementing actions you've already decided upon. So you are now implementing those risk responses. You cannot be planning them. And for that reason, we would cancel this. And D is what we're actually doing. It says which process should follow. What should follow implement risk responses? It's monitor risks. All right, thank you all very much. And we've come to the end. I'm going to stop the recording. And those of you who have signed up for the next event where we are talking about the other 5 areas, I'm sure you realize these are not a cakewalk. Just imagine what integration is. Integration is a beast. So integration is actually 2 days for that reason, because it's when you go deep, it becomes harder. All right, so thank you all very much. I'm going to stay back. I'm going to answer any questions you guys might have. So if you have any questions regarding the exam regarding this topic, regarding anything, feel free to chat them in. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you very, very much. So those of you watching after the fact,